The January 6th Select Committee held another big public primetime hearing last night where they went through a bunch more information specifically about how Donald Trump on January 6th did not act for hours while the Capitol was being attacked. He sat in the White House dining room, watched this unravel for 187 minutes, 3 hours. He watched the Capitol get attacked. He watched law enforcement officers get assaulted. All of this goes down. Lawmakers being threatened, his vice president being threatened, and he just sits. There is a camera, as they highlighted during these hearings, just down the hall in the White House press room that's on 24/7. The president can address the nation from. He could have walked straight down there instantly and called off his mob, but he didn't. For 3 hours, he didn't. In addition to that, he did not reach out to the necessary law enforcement organizations as he should have, reaching out to the National Guard, all of these different people who could have helped intervene and prevent more damage from being done. So the phrase they zeroed in on was dereliction of duties, which I think is an accurate assessment of Trump's actions or inactions that day. So they had 2 people testify. We're about to get to a bunch of clips, so stick with me. There's so much to go through. There's actually too much, so we're gonna have to break this up into multiple segments as far as specific parts that I want to talk about in its own video. But this video will kind of break down all of the main points in one big summary with clips to go along. So that's what we'll be doing. But quickly, a few big points they made up front. The call logs were completely empty from 1:21 to 4 p.m. We know Trump was making calls during that time, but there's no logs of them. In addition to that, his presidential diary, nothing from that crucial time period. And on top of that, no photos were taken, even though the White House photographer was thinking, hey, certification of the election, Trump's watching this go down, I want to capture this. But they said, no, do not take any photos. So there's a lot of missing information around Trump, but obviously we get the necessary parts of it from people who ended up testifying during these hearings. But a little suspicious that there's missing call logs, missing documentation of what Trump was doing and who he was talking to during that time. As I previously had started to say, Matthew Pottinger testified during these hearings, and he was Trump's deputy national security advisor, deputy national security, and then Trump's deputy press secretary also testified, and both of them resigned on January 6th. Sorry if you can tell I'm trying to move through this really quickly because there's a lot to go through. So both of them testified. They both resigned on January 6th based on what they saw. That's how bad it was because of Trump's inaction. And even when he did address the event through a tweet, it just was not at all enough. A couple last things before we get into these fascinating clips. When Mike Pence was being evacuated, and at this point, as we're about to look at, his security details were feeling like they might die. They were thinking they wanted to reach out to their family to tell them they loved them. That's how scared they were. You know what Trump was doing during all of this? When his vice president was being threatened, when all of these lawmakers' lives were being threatened, he was calling senators, trying to convince them to not certify the election results. Because the certification had gotten blocked temporarily because of this attack, he was calling them to say, hey, whenever you do end up going through this process, this lawful election process, I want you to not certify the election results. Tommy Tuberville was one of the people that Trump called. Wild stuff. That was the lie. That was the plot that got us into this mess. Him trying to not allow the certification to go through, not allow this lawful election process to happen. And he continued that process while his vice president's life was threatened. Wild, wild stuff. So on that note, Kayleigh McEnany, I know you all know who she is, the former press secretary of Donald Trump. In her testimony that was pre-recorded, she was one of the people who gave this information about Trump being interested in getting a list of these senators who he could call and try to convince to block a lawful election process. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.
All right, then it says back there, and he wants list of senators. And then he's calling them one by one. Do you know which ones he called?
To the best of my recollection, no. As I say in my notes, he wanted a list of the senators, and I left him at that point.
So he wanted a list of senators from Kayleigh McEnany while people are being assaulted, law enforcement officers, the Capitol's being attacked. All of this is happening. His vice president's life is being threatened. What is he concerned with? Hey, give me the names of senators that I can call to pressure. Next, someone we had previously heard from, Pat Cipollone, who was Trump's White House counsel, so he was his legal advisor, was one of the people who recounted that everyone around Donald Trump was pleading with him, please, please go call off the mob. All of these staff members were saying, please, Trump, these are your supporters, call them off, and Trump would not do it.
Did you continue, Mr. Cipollone, throughout the period of time up until 4/17, continue, you and others, to push for a stronger statement?
Yes.
Were you joined in that effort by Ivanka Trump?
Yes.
Eric Hershey?
Yes.
By Mark Meadows?
Yes.
So the question he was asked is, previously you told us you were pressuring for Trump to make a stronger statement than the little tweets he sent out, which some of them were just provoking the crowd further. And Pat Cipollone is saying, yes, I did, as well as all of these people, including Ivanka Trump, pressuring her father to give some strong, forceful statement encouraging his supporters to stop attacking the Capitol. The next really grim moment from these hearings was a security officer who was on the radio lines during this whole event, recounted how at a crucial moment when they were trying to evacuate Mike Pence's security details were getting on the radio and saying things like, tell my family I love them. They were so worried that it was going to get very, very ugly, that they possibly were going to die, that's where their mind was at. That's how scared these security people were, and that's how bad it all looked at that moment.
The members of the BP detail at this time were starting to fear for their own lives. There was a lot of yelling, a lot of very personal calls over the radio. So it was disturbing. I don't like talking about it, but there were calls to say goodbye to family members, so on and so forth. It was getting, for whatever the reason was on the ground, the BP detail thought that this was about to get very ugly.
From their vantage point, this attack on the Capitol looked so bad that the vice president's security was thinking about telling their family they loved them, thinking they would die. Just heartbreaking stuff. And during all this, again, remember, during all this, while people think they're about to die in there, Trump was watching on TV for 3 hours and didn't do anything. Just really keep that in mind. So the next moment is the Deputy National Security Advisor, Matthew Pottinger, who was there testifying live, explained why he resigned on January 6th.
To see that the president was attacking Vice President Pence for doing his constitutional duty. So the tweet looked to me like the opposite of what we really needed at that moment, which was a de-escalation. And that's why I had said earlier that it looked like fuel being poured on the fire. So that was the moment that I decided that I was going to resign, that would be my last day at the White House. I simply didn't want to be associated with the events that were unfolding on the Capitol.
So someone who was by Trump's side in the longer testimony, you'll see he's very still complimentary of certain things that Trump did. This is not someone who just wants to stab Trump in the back. No, he was so disturbed by what he saw that he had to resign, even though he was totally on board with Trump all the way up until then. And I will say, that reminds me, please don't forget, I think it's a great, great thing for you to go watch the full hearings yourself. There's so much in each one of these hearings, so try to watch them live or watch them after, because I do my absolute best to give you all the highlights, but can't possibly do all of it. So definitely watch them yourself. So the next moment we're going to look at is they talked about how the House of Representatives leadership and the Senate leadership were having to pretty much do what Trump should have done, which was call the Secretary of Defense and coordinate when they would be able to be safe to go back into the Capitol, and say, we need you to act so that you can get them all cleared out so that we can go and continue this process. We're not going to let them stop us from certifying the election, which credit to the leaders of both the House and Senate for sticking to that and saying, we're not going to let them accomplish what they were attempting to accomplish. Let's take a look at that. And again, they're on the phone with the Secretary of Defense saying, when can we get back in there to continue this lawful process?
People keep us from finishing our business, so we need you to get the building cleared, give us the okay so we can go back in session and finish up the people's business as soon as possible.
Amen, sir. Mr. Secretary and Senator Schumer, some people here in the Capitol Police believe it would take us several days to secure the building. Do you agree with that analysis?
I'm not on the ground, but I do not agree with that analysis.
So what is the earliest that we could safely resume our proceedings in the Senate and House chambers? The earliest we could safely resume.
Here's my assessment, but I prefer to be on the ground, which I personally would prefer to be right now, but I need to be here. I would say, best case, we're looking at 4 to 5 hours.
So Trump should have been on the phone with all of these individuals from different organizations that could have helped to bring up some sort of solution to what was going on. And instead, he was sitting there silently watching this go down on TV and then calling senators and trying to pressure them. So just, you can't get a more vile depiction of Trump's actions on that day. And another example of this is Mike Pence was attempting to do what Trump should have been doing. And Mike Pence was calling the shots, calling General Mark Milley, requesting his help as well. Here is Mark Milley's recounting of that.
There were 2 or 3 calls with Vice President Pence. He was very animated, and he issued very explicit, very direct, unambiguous orders. There was no question about that. And I can get you the exact quotes, I guess, from some of our records somewhere, but he was very animated, very direct, very firm, and to Secretary Milley. Get the military down here, get the guard down here, put down this situation, etc.
So at the time that Trump should have been calling Mark Milley and sorting this out, it was having to be Mike Pence. The next moment that Mark Milley was highlighted for recounting was whenever Chief of Staff of Donald Trump, Mark Meadows, ended up calling him. Finally, someone close to Trump is calling, or directly operationally, next to Trump is calling Mark Milley. What does he have to say? He's not so much concerned with finding a solution. Instead, he's concerned with the narrative getting out that Mike Pence is calling the shots. And hey, Mark Milley, we don't want that narrative to get out, so please try to change the messaging and make it clear that Trump's still in charge, even though he wasn't.
Said, this is from memory. He said, we have to kill the narrative that the vice president is making all the decisions. We need to establish the narrative that that the president is still in charge and that things are steady or stable or what's that thing. I immediately interpret that as politics. Red flag for me personally, no action, but I remember it distinctly. I don't do political narratives.
And that assessment was correct. Even at that moment, that crisis moment, the consideration and the concern of Mark Meadows and probably Trump, because he probably sent that message to Mark Meadows, was that the political narrative was getting out of hand and they didn't like the way that was going. Well, yeah, whenever you sick a mob onto the Capitol to threaten lawmakers' lives, to try to overturn a lawful election results, the narrative's not going to look good in your favor, especially when all this happens and you sit idly by and don't do anything, to the point where your vice president has to get directly involved and start coordinating law enforcement's response. Just insane that would be a consideration at all at that moment from them. And to just give you another representation of how vile Trump was. This, to me, I always thought of him in a low regard as far as his character was concerned, but going through the process of understanding all the information that's come out of these hearings and the Select Committee's investigations has just really made me flabbergasted and completely mind blown with the deep level of complete empathy-less void that exists in Trump's heart. He can't think about anything outside of his own self, his own ambitions, to an absolute wild extent. And so an example of this is while Pence was being evacuated, people were screaming, "Hey, Mike Pence," super scary moment. Trump tweets out, "Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, give states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth." So at this point, the Capitol is being attacked, and Trump is tweeting out the lie that caused all of this. Just Absolutely. Again, there's no empathy there. There's no ability to have any sort of compassion or a heart or feelings whatsoever for the people who are having their lives threatened. The next moment that happened during this hearing was the Deputy Press Secretary, Sarah Matthews, testified about why she resigned on January 6th.
Those that we watched cause violence at the Capitol. Instead, he told the people who we had just watched storm our nation's Capitol with the intent on overthrowing our democracy, violently attack police officers, and chant heinous things like "Hang Mike Pence. We love you. You're very special." And as a spokesperson for him, I knew that I would be asked to defend that. And to me, his refusal to act and call off the mob that day and his refusal to condemn the violence was indefensible. And so I knew that I would be resigning that evening. And so I finished out the workday, went home and called my loved ones to tell them of my decision, and resigned that evening.
So of course, what pushed her over the edge was whenever Trump released that video finally after 4 p.m. saying, "We love you. I understand why you're angry. This was stolen from us, but go home and in peace," or whatever. And we are going to do a full segment on this never seen before footage of him attempting to record that video and attempting to record the video of him saying there's going to be a peaceful transition of power the next day. So two just bonkers kind of like blooper reels, sort of never before seen footage. We're going to do that in a separate segment. So definitely look out for that on my YouTube channel. It's crazy. He could not get himself to say the things because he still didn't want to admit that he lost the election fair and square. So she was referencing one of those videos that we'll look at, the kind of extra footage that they now revealed, but he wasn't able to say the responsible things in that moment, and that is what pushed her over the edge when he said "we love you" to people who just tried to murder his vice president and murder all these lawmakers and caused all of this damage. "We love you." So that's what pushed his deputy press secretary over the edge and caused her to resign, and now speaking out. Finally, to wrap this all up, at the end of all of this, his response, after the riots had happened, after they had attacked the Capitol, all of this had gone down. He'd witnessed it all happen. There's no question about if he was aware of the damage that was done. His response was to tweet out this: "These are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who have been badly and unfairly treated for so long. Go home with love and in peace. Remember this day forever." So that was at 6 p.m., way after the Capitol riot had begun. And his response is, these are the things that happen. This is what happens whenever you steal an election, which obviously we know didn't happen. I mean, you could make some argument for someone who's really deranged to not see it until it all started going down and I didn't realize my actions were going to lead to something so terrible and I'm so remorseful. And no, he's even more deranged than that. Not only did he build up his followers to do this, not only did he tell a lie countless times, even as it was proven to be false, once he saw the effects of that lie and saw what he had done, his response was to continue on with the lie. His response was to say, yep, that's what happens whenever you don't try to overturn an election in my favor. So really dangerous stuff. He has to be held accountable. Absolutely. Our democracy was threatened in a very serious way on January 6th, the build up to it, and all of Trump's and his allies' actions in trying to overturn the 2020 election. So this is super important. I do think we should be keeping our eyes on this investigation and the information that is coming out of it. Again, we do have much more out of this hearing, just kind of individual moments that I think warrant an entire segment. So look out for that on my YouTube channel. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Luke P. Beasley, and let me know what you think of all of this.